Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rogue Reads. My name is Val Constantine, and I'm one of the Rogue Women writers. We are a group of 6 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from journalist to intelligence officer to White House strategist. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Those of you in the Zoom room will be part of the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourselves by typing your name and any contact information that you'd like to share into the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors or if you have a question you'd like to ask. Your questions and comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time. Tonight's authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers after all of them have spoken. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. Please use the hashtag Rogue Reads and hashtag Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works. Once again, my name is Val Constantine, and I am one half of the writing duo of Liv Constantine. We write psychological thrillers. I'm here in Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event tonight. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the first of these 4 amazingly talented authors. Gary Phillips, welcome, is a native of Los Angeles and has been a union community organizer, an activist, and head of nonprofits to improve race relations. He loves history and he loves comics. He's written 18 novels and 9 comics and 50 short stories. And he also edited the Anthony-winning anthology, The Obama Inheritance. His writing has been described as larger than life and some of the most realistic crime fiction in the genre. Gary's favorite snack, we can't forget our snacks, is cashews. I'm totally with you, Gary, on this one. And his favorite drink is Jameson or generic.
But I'm not imbibing right now, Valerie. I'm clean and sober.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, maybe that could be fun.
All right.
His newest release, Matthew Henson and the Ice Temple of Harlem, is a pulp fiction reimagining of the adventures of real-life explorer Matthew Henson, the first Black man to reach the North Pole, and it's set against the backdrop of the Harlem Renaissance. Welcome again, Gary, and we're anxious to hear you tell us more about Matthew Henson and the Ice Temple of Harlem and what you'll be reading tonight.
Well, thank you, Valerie. I'm just going to be reading a small intro to the novel, and because it is a pulp rendition of the real-life Matthew Henson, it starts with a little bit of action. And I guess the only other thing to say is that I guess a lot of people might know his name, but of course they're not quite sure why they know his name. And so for whatever different reasons, I'd known about Matthew Henson for some time. And then I finally read his, it's not really a biography, but it's kind of his memoir of reaching the North Pole with that expedition. I mean, this is like the 8th try when they finally reach the North Pole, which is in 1909, because his book, A Negro at the North Pole, came out in 1912. And anyway, just to make the long story really short, he never got quite the accolades that Peary got, and certainly nobody remembers the 4 Inuit men who were with the expedition as well, who helped actually make the expedition possible. And I try to give them some justice in the book as well. It should be noted that Henson was the only one on the expedition to actually learn the Inuit languages. And then just as another little interesting side note, and this is neither in Peary's book or Henson's book, they both had Inuit children up there in the long winters of the North. And I didn't know about that for a while. And then, as I said, I read Henson's book, and then I stumbled on the intro to that particular edition I have of the book was by a professor named S. Allen Counter, who himself was something of, I guess, a Hensonologist. He was a Harvard professor of hard sciences, but he nonetheless was quite fascinated with Henson. And he is the one who, I guess this is somewhat an open secret, but nonetheless, he is the one who, in his book about Henson, talked about the children. And in fact, This was in the 1980s, and the two sons were already in their 80s, and he went back up to Greenland there and brought them back to the States, and they got feted and such, because in fact, in reality, neither Henson nor Perry returned to the North to those kids. Henson actually never had any other children. He was not married at the time. Perry was married at the time. But in my book, I try to bring a little bit more justice to the story. Me being a grandfather now, so the book, one of the things that is driving Henson is to, in fact, return to the North to his then teenage son. So there's that. So should I read a little?
Well, so you know that Henson was born in Maryland. There are several schools
That's right.
and parks here named after him.
Right. And he had actually something of a Dickens kind of early life. He, his folks died early on, and he was like out of a Dickens novel. He was raised by him and his sister were raised by the cruel stepmom, and he ran away at 12 to the this is in the DC area, but he came back went on the road by himself at 12, back to the docks in Maryland, and signed on. And even then it was against the law for a 12-year-old, but he signed on as a cabin boy and came under the tutelage of the kind older Captain Childs. I think Captain Childs must have been in his 60s even then, and was an old man of the sea, and taught the boy nautical navigation and math, and they talked about the classics and so forth and so on. And so it was a very interesting, childhood for that period of time until Captain Childs died. So I incorporate, of course, I mythologize it, but I incorporate some of that into the book as well.
His whole life sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Especially for a Black man at that time,
right.
To be able to be part of that incredible exploration is amazing. So looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, well, hope
Thank
so.
you.
All right,
okay.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to our next author, and we are thrilled tonight to have Heather Graham with us.
Wait, isn't he going to read? He needs to read.
He said he wasn't going to read. I'm going to force him to read. Go read, Gary. I'm sorry.
Read, dance. Shoot him in the foot. All right. I'll read very, very quickly. I'll read a very brief beginning. Now, I should set the scene a little bit, because I am coming into the middle of the scene. As Chris mentioned, the book is set in the Harlem Renaissance, so set in 1928. So this is, of course, right before the crash of 29. But things are quite booming at this point in Harlem. And in particular, in my story, one of the leaders, one of the boss of the numbers racket is a very interesting woman out of history, Stephanie St. Clair, who was called Queenie St. Clair. She was of both white and black parentage. Her dad she was from Martinique. And she was a very interesting person in her own right. But she is one of the bosses of the numbers racket in Harlem. Dutch Schultz, the infamous gangster, which is in reality is trying to muscle in on the numbers racket. So that figures into the book as well. And this opening scene is a little bit of that, but you'll get a little bit of flavor. I'm sorry to interlude on your quietude, Mrs. CeeLo. The late Mister was a railroad man. Old child, he traveled all over this country on them rails. She looked off toward a mantel with various framed photos on it, as well as a good-sized Santa Fe Railroad enameled shield. Yes, ma'am. Where would we be without the railroads? He eyed the window across the room, but wasn't going to rush things and make her more nervous, no matter what might be transpiring just below them. He'd learned long ago in far harsher climes to pace himself. Lord, yes, she went on. Our people's means of freedom in many ways, isn't that right? He prayed they weren't about to have a revival. That is so. He inched forward a notch. Would you like some tea? She offered, but instead of the kitchen, she glanced toward her sideboard and its lead glass cabinets. Though I imagine an outdoorsman like yourself might be wanting something a bit more bracing. About that there window, Mrs. CeeLo. Oh, yes, she started, as if waking from slumber. You didn't come here to chit-chat. Maybe some other time when the clock's not against me. She beamed up at him. Really? Would you come back to speak to the auxiliary of as my special guest? I would be delighted. The ladies would be beside themselves, Mr. Henson. Matt will do. She clapped her hands together appreciatively. Fine, fine. He went on past her to the window. He undid the lock and slid it up easily. After moving away her easy chair and lamp aside, he secured his prong grapple hook on the frame and sill. The sharp ends dug into the wood and would leave gouge marks, but there was nothing to be helping that. Mrs. Celo didn't raise a fuss, being too polite, he figured. Is this a government mission, Mr. Matt? The widow asked as he put a leg outside the open window. No, this is a private engagement, Mrs. Celo. I see, she said, her dubiousness evident. Henson was aware that there was a persistent rumor that many believed he was an operative for an outfit called the International Detective Agency. There was no such organization, but he knew the source had been a serialized story in a magazine several years ago called The Black Sleuth. Elements of the popular story got transferred from the page, as these things do, into speculation in conversations in cafes and beauty salons throughout Harlem and elsewhere. From there, over time, fiction took on the trappings of gossip, which always had its own reality. I'm thinking, once you're gone, you're not coming back tonight. He was half out the window. Unlikely. How do I get in touch with you? She asked. Just leave word for me at May's Diner. Over on Lenox? Yes, ma'am, near 132nd. Now, if you would, once I'm outside, please don't go near the window, he added, figuring she might take a gander as he descended. He also hoped bullets wouldn't be coming through to ruin her nice flooring from the story below. Very well, she said resignedly. He was depriving her of some of the excitement of having Matt Henson in her apartment, but she'd still have more than enough to tell her church ladies. His booted soles firm against the building's bricks, Henson, who'd slipped on supple seal skin gloves, held himself in place on the knotted rope a few inches below the older lady's window. He'd lowered the sash, cognizant the warmth of the day was giving way to the early evening, and not everyone liked the cold as he did. From where he was now, the window he wanted was below him to his left. He clambered down and cursed under his breath. The curtains were drawn. No way to tell what was going on inside, except a single gap between them showed that lights were on. Henson worked the rope around his veined forearm, holding his body in place. The other hand free, he got his ice axe loose. He had one of his miniature smoke bombs with him, as well as an incendiary type. The latter was based on a grenade developed by the Germans toward the close of World War I. He wasn't of a mind to start a fire in the room beyond, at least if he didn't have to, but better to be prepared. Henson clenched the axe handle between his teeth and unlimbered the rope, got both hands on it as he slipped down again. He came to rest just above the curtain window, not worried if those inside detected movement or not. What had that blowhard Perry always barked? Find a way or make one, Henson. Find a way or make one.
He sounds like a spy to me.
Yeah, he does.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Gary, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I noticed that you wrote a little of that in what would be sort of dialect.
Yeah.
And then you're writing in a past time. So how do you avoid using like contemporary terms? I mean, do you find yourself doing that? And do you write in dialect through the whole story?
I write dialect through the whole story. That's a good question. But you know what, Chris, I'm such a fan of old movies, right? I grew up watching, Edgar G. Robinson and Jimmy Cagney and Bogart and all those 30s films. So all that patter is in my skull. And so every once in a while, I'll stop and you'll think, oh, they never use the term like healthcare, or they never, they never use it, or they never use the term like at the end of the day, so I think usually you sort of catch yourself. I think you kind of figure out, oh yeah, right, exactly. And then hopefully for reference too, I have some great, books on my shelves. One of them is the Gangsters of Harlem. And it kind of goes through this whole history. So you're right. So invariably I'll try to, as I do the rewrites, try to keep that voice in your head that says, what would they have said in the late 20s, even against what they have said in the late 30s, right? I mean, slang always changes. And so I think sometimes I might slip, but But to show you what a nut I am for detail, and I realized that I kind of fought with the editor to keep this in the book, and it was a useless detail that I, hope that I didn't go overboard with the other details. But because my dad was a mechanic and I grew up around cars, I had to have this whole weird sequence about how you would have started a late 20s automobile, because it was a whole big business with the choke and the starter and the spark and blah blah blah. It was like a whole mess, man. It was like 5 minutes to get the thing going. You know what I mean? Not just turn the key and start the car up. And I thought, well, you know what? I got to put that in only because it's so out of time. It's so different now, right? I mean, my God.
Tom Clancy.
but hopefully, let me tell the potential reader, I don't bog it down with that kind of crazy detail everywhere. I just every once in a while I'll use that kind of detail just because it's just so fascinating.
There is a question for Gary. Noir seems to have a loyal following even in today's environment. What do you think it is about noir that readers gravitate to in their reading? Well,
we could make the point that here we are living in a pandemic. We couldn't possibly be living in a much more noir time than we are now, right? I mean, the Mask of the Red Death and Poe and all that. And well, I think in the end, what is it about noir? Is it doomed characters on a doomed path, or is it doomed characters looking for redemption? I just finished watching the reboot of Perry Mason, which I guess some people like, some people. I quite enjoyed it, but I thought one of the things that they did right was to, put him in that time period and make him and the others around him, Devil Street, Paul Burke, Paul Drake, make them characters of that time, shaped by that time period, so that they're not all crooked, nor are they all goody two shoes, right? So maybe that's what noir tells us, right? That even though we are somewhat bent and flawed, we can still try to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Okay.
We're ready to move. Well, Heather, we're still thrilled that you're here.
That's right.
Well, I'm so thrilled to be here. You're the first adults I'm not related to. I've gotten kind of this close to the last few days, so.
Yeah, I can relate.
Gary, I have to say, I was just thinking that because somebody was talking the other day about good people can do bad things,
right?
And yet bad people can do good things. That's right. I can't wait to read this.
Oh, good.
Okay, everybody. So Heather Graham, here with us tonight, is the New York Times bestselling author of more than 200 novels and novellas. I know, right? And her work spans all genres, from romance to paranormal to thriller. So it's really hard to imagine that she has time for anything else. But she is a certified scuba diver. She loves ballroom dancing. She loves singing. And she is the mother of 5 children. So it's amazing. She has been honored with countless awards, including the Silver Bullet from Thriller Writers and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Romance Writers of America. And every year, she hosts the Romantic Times Vampire Charity Ball, which raises money for Pediatric AIDS Society. Heather's favorite drink is coffee. Her favorite snack is nuts, which again, I can totally relate to. But the coffee is only her favorite if she's not eating nuts. Eating nuts, then her favorite drink is iced tea. So, Dreaming of Death is her latest book, and that releases in September, and it is number 32 in the Crew of Hunters series. It's a story of a serial killer who is stalking Washington, D.C., and whose victims are vulnerable women. And all of the clues lead to suspects who are part of D.C.'s powerful elite. It's great to have you here tonight, Heather.
Thank you so much. And I do not have a copy of that book.
No,
I'm sorry. This is the one that's actually out now.
Oh, okay.
It's called Deadly Touch. Yeah, it just
and that's
came
part
out.
of the series as well, right?
Yeah, it came out on July 21st. So I'm sorry, that's what I thought.
That's fine. That's great. We'll take whatever you got.
Okay, thank you. And it's this one, Deadly Touch, was especially fun for me to write. The Crew of Hunters has been termed Supernatural Meets Criminal Minds. It's an elite group of FBI agents who, you know, it's kind of like certain things that you can have, like perhaps 1% of the population or a percentage of that are people who can actually speak to the dead when the dead choose to speak. So they're capable of seeing the dead. It's really based in reality. And I thank international thriller writers for that, because they took us to the FBI once a year, every year in New York City. Right. And it was wonderful, the amount of information that, you know, the FBI was willing to share. And I would have not thought that the reason they did this is because the FBI does want to be seen as warm and cuddly, because if they need your help, you don't want to be thinking, oh, they're the FBI. But apparently we think worse of the CIA. So I don't know, but they were great. The information they shared with us have been great. And then of course I make them they're their own separate agency with their own separate headquarters, because some of the other agents, you know, joke about them and call them the Ghostbusters, but they have quite a nice success rate. This one, the one Deadly Touch, was especially fun for me because I have lived in South Florida my entire life. I'm down in the Miami area. I can't say I have deep roots here because both of my parents were immigrants. One came from Scotland, one came from Ireland, and they met in, they both worked for Con Ed up by you. They were actually in Chicago. And then they moved to Florida. I guess both of them came from cold places, or maybe they missed rain. I don't know. And maybe that's why they moved down here. But growing up down here, I'm extremely close to one of our Miccosukee Indian villages. And then of course we have the Seminole Indians. And from the time I was a little kid, I was just fascinated with the culture. And of course, we take pride in the Seminoles were the only tribe to never surrender. You know, they just kept going deeper and deeper into the Everglades. I also love the Everglades, as strange as that sounds, because we do have horrendous snakes and alligators and all kinds of creatures. Actually, the mosquitoes are probably worse than anything else. That tends to be with South Florida. But growing up, the tiger family, I'm not really sure how they wound up with the name tiger, because we do not have tigers in South Florida, but maybe people were saying panthers. We do have panthers down here. So maybe they were saying them as tigers. But one of the popular names in both the Miccosukee and the Seminole tribes is tiger. And brothers had a band. We would go see the band all the time. I was just fascinated, totally fascinated with their culture. So my hero in this is a mixed kid. My favorite thing about the United States too is that we all wind up mixed up. So he had an Irish mom and a Miccosukee dad, and grew up with a cross of cultures. And so this is my protagonist, and the young woman in it has also grown up in the area and knows it fairly well. I think that's the book I'm reading. I'm gonna have to check and make sure. No, you know what's so hard about this is that when they are done, you know, for HarperCollins, I turned this book in over a year ago. And it's a little bit scary. Sometimes somebody will ask you a question and you're like, no clue. So because you
were like, what year?
Don't remember that far back. But it's just, again, I really enjoyed writing this. And then this is sad but true, and Lisa certainly knows this one. The Everglades has also historically been just a great place to dump a body, because it can go so quickly. There are so many things, you know, that can happen to it that by the time somebody gets a hold of it, there's usually very little forensic evidence left. So, and then, you know, throughout time, there have been many, many barrels found with bodies in them eventually. But like, again, it's such a unique environment. It's also just, it's an incredibly cool environment, and I love it. We have something called Shark Valley, which is a park, and all of these creatures are out all the time, and they have never had an incident there with the different very deadly snakes and the alligators. Oh, but I do think that people don't go to a park and try to pull an alligator's tail or anything like that. So that's probably why they haven't had any you know, and if you're at a park and you know they're there, you make sure you're not going to walk on the pygmy rattlers or the eastern diamondbacks or the corpse snake, you know, or anything like that. So, but like I said, this was for me just a great deal of fun to do because I love the environment. I love going out there. Again, I have just been fascinated my whole life. When I was a little kid, I tried to figure out a way that someone had come from Ireland maybe 50 years ago and had an affair with an Indian and then gone back so that I would have some of this Miccosukee blood in me, but apparently not. But I, you know, and of course we're all very proud of the Seminole who now own the Hard Rock and are doing very well with that. So that's a lot of fun to see. Of course, Miccosukee have a casino too. You know, you don't want to miss out on any of that. But they also they're going out to visit the villages is just wonderful. People are great, very friendly people, very giving. But again, you wind up with a problem because they are sovereign nations and you have different forces down here. For one, Miami-Dade, I think there's now 33 different cities in Miami-Dade. So it's very difficult when people die on a state line or in disputed areas because you will have county police, you'll have city police, and then of course if you're out in that area, you will have Miccosukee or Seminole police depending on where you are. So it can create confusion and also it can force people to work together and get to know each other too. So.
Are you going to do a little bit of a reading for us?
I think so, if I can find it.
Okay.
I will try to. Somebody, I would greatly appreciate it if I am not good at timing. So, and I have to admit that I completely forgot we were reading. I did not forget that we were talking. I just forgot that we were reading. So Lisa, just if I'm getting close to the end, if you don't mind. Okay. She was found, what remained of her, on the south side embankment by the road in the canal that stretched the length of the Tamiami Trail, just about 10 miles west of the casino. It wasn't surprising that she had been partially consumed. What was surprising seemed to be that she had been almost neatly bitten in half. The top half remained, the bottom half did not. This is how we found her, exactly how we found her. Detective Nigel Pereira, Miami-Dade Homicide, told Axel. At his side, Andrew Osceola of the Miccosukee Tribal Police shook his head. We haven't touched anything, he said, echoing Nigel. No one has touched anything. Even Doc Warner said that since you were on the way, he'd hold off for a minute. Axel nodded and hunkered down by the body. He was somewhat surprised his old friends were so courteously resolved he become involved as quickly and completely as possible. He wasn't a medical examiner. He had, however, seen his share of murders and the sad state in which a body, recently a viable human being, might be found. The Everglades beckoned to nature lovers and bird watchers, but also offered a tempting place to dump a body. The miles of wetlands were hardly ever traversed fully, and numerous creatures survived off carrion, plus trees, grasses, and brush that all but enveloped any form, living or dead. We would have found her anyway, without the tip from the so-called psychic, Nigel said. Vultures, Andrew added quietly. Of course, they'll come for anything. A dead possum, roadkill. His voice faded. They were not looking at any kind of roadkill. Axel nodded and gave his attention to the body. Flies were swarming around them. As Andrew had noted, the sky was alive with vultures. But at least this woman had been found, and that gave them a far better chance of finding her killer than the woman who went missing, never to be found. Victim had been in her mid-30s, he thought, but even that was difficult to judge. Even the prettiest little birds that flitted about down here were fond of soft tissue. That meant they'd gone for the eyes, the lips, and the line at the waist where the body had somehow been severed. Never seen an alligator do anything like that, Andrew noted. But they will eat what's already dead when they're hungry enough. Don't need to drown a body when its gator can only snap down, Nigel said. Usually lies in wait, mouth open. When it hunts on shore, it finds prey, opens its mouth, and snaps. I'd say improbable, but possible? Snapped down on her, dragged off the bottom half? It's not like he's going to think about it and say, I only got half, better grab that other part too, Andrew said. And what with all the constrictor snakes we got around here, now food is scarce. Axel saw Dr. Warner standing with his medical bag in hand, stoic as he waited, but surely growing impatient. He looked at the body again. There were points he could note without the bottom half of her body. She was naked except for remnants of her clothing. Axel thought her clothing had been destroyed by birds or other scavenging creatures, rather than having been torn by a human hand. A ring of blood set around her throat like a necklace. There were abrasions on her wrists. She had been bound at one time, most probably by rope. The abrasion marks were rough. Someone had held her against her will. But with the bottom half of the body gone, they wouldn't know about sexual assault unless Dr. Warner found telltale fluids elsewhere on the body. Most evidence would have been heavily compromised. The Everglades, as Axel knew too well, could swallow many a sin like a massive Stygian dark hole. He stood and looked at the tribal policeman and the homicide detective, both men he had known since he'd been a child. They had each decided on different paths to law enforcement, all headed in the direction where they thought they might serve best. Nigel and Andrew had often worked together. As a Miccosukee officer, Andrew had passed all the state certificates requirement and then had been commissioned by the United States Department of the Interior, Indian Bureau of Affairs, and by the National Park Service as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Complicated, but while a homicide detective would be called in by Miami-Dade on this, the eastern side of the trail, Andrew would remain part of the force of the investigation. Axel knew that during the years he had been at the academy with Adam Harrison's crew of Hunter's Unit, his 12 friends had been working many a case together. 2 bodies in oil drums, case solved, tracked down to a drug ring, a domestic situation, murder at a campground, the capture of felons involved in a murder for hire case, caught as they tried to hide in the great southern section of the River of Grass. Axel knew as much as he did about the cases because the 3 of them kept up and also made use of each other, listening, being sounding boards, offering theories or suggestions from afar. Sometimes the distance could lend a different perspective, like a bird's eye view when others were on the ground. And he'd come down himself just a year or so ago on the oil drum case.
I can see that body and the vultures and the whole. That was.
I have no idea how long I've been reading, so I don't want to take up too much time.
It was great. It was terrific.
It was fabulous.
Oh my gosh.
We have a question for you. So impressed with your prolific literary output. What's your writing day like, and how many books a year do you write? Where do your ideas come from?
It all depends on the ideas. Again, you know, I live in South Florida. All one needs to do is read the news, so it often gives you quite a bit. And then the people around you. I know one time I worked. My son is. This is one of my favorite, I guess, things to be able to use. Is one of my son's friends works for what used to be Stan Winston Studios, now called Legacy. And she has this most amazing job. She's a fabricator. And so she got us in to see the studio, and there's the most horrendous looking vampire creature you ever want to see, standing right next to the Geico pig, you know. So, and then another part of her job, besides making these creatures, is she puts together the pieces for Iron Man. And so she works with dressing Robert Downey Jr. And when people said, oh my God, she would be, you know, like, somebody's got to do it. So apparently he's very nice, by the way. He's very good to all of them. So it's just, you know, the people in your lives. The 5 kids finally paid off. They have friends who are U.S. Marshals and you know, who have all kinds of really interesting. One is a Miami-Dade detective. So, I mean, it's wonderful, you know, to have all those because they just give you great ideas. And my day used to be better. I'm living with a 2-year-old, and she loves to push buttons on a computer. So I kind of have to find my time away from her to, you know, get anything done. I don't know how I had 5 children because
we have another question. We have another question. And I am sitting in the dark because the power has gone out here.
Oh no!
I have a cell phone that is my hotspot, and I have a laptop that is my computer that has a battery. So you may lose me eventually, but not quite yet. This is a general question from Kevin Moore, who actually is a wildlife officer in Nova Scotia who I know from my bird watching. And he is asking you from Facebook a general question. Heather, oh my gosh, this is terrible because the script is so bad, but it's topic for an author researched for a novel. Let's see, what's it say? Everglades makes me wonder if any topic an author researched for a novel became a permanent interest in their life, or is it knowledge you absorb just for the novel and then discarded? So I think that this is a question for like all of you authors. For instance, they're asking me, I became a birder in real life after writing my bird watching novels. It's true, I became a field birder after writing the first bird watching novel, but I was always a backyard bird watcher. So how about for you, Heather, or any of you authors? Did you come up with an interest and then get really absorbed by it for a lifetime?
I would have to admit with me, it's kind of the other way around. I love to dive, so I use diving in a lot of things. My son worked for Arthur Murray, which I thought gave me one of the best title ever, Dead on the Dance Floor, and everybody in the studio knew who I should kill. But I mean, usually I tend to fall into things in life and find them so intriguing that I do actually wind up going deeper into it because it is so intriguing, but it's usually, I have to admit, something that I've been in.
You already were drawn.
I have always loved the Everglades. Yeah, I think they're unique and special. And hey, we're the only people in the continental U.S. with crocodiles and alligators. Just for that, just because that's trivia you have always wanted to know.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Thank you so much. So our next author is David Heska Wanbli Weiden, and he is the author of children's book Spotted Tail, the great leader and hero of the Sicangu Lakota Nation. Did I say that correctly? Of which David is a member, and he's also a distant relative of Chief Spotted Tail. David is professor of Native American Studies at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And one of his passions, I've learned, is to educate people about Indian American culture, history, and their sacred spiritual traditions. His favorite snack is Cape Cod kettle potato chips. I love those too. And his favorite drink is Stella Artois beer, which you're not drinking tonight, right?
I'm not.
David's crime thriller, Winter Counts, publishes on August the 25th and is one of the first crime thrillers to be written by a Native American and to be set on a reservation. In it, Virgil Wounded Horse, the local enforcer on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota, embarks on a dangerous mission to track down the source of a heroin influx. But he soon discovers that the scales of justice, both the tribal council and the American legal system, are tipped against the reservation. Confluence of people, as Heather was talking about in Florida, in Seminole. Winter Counts has been chosen as an Amazon Best Book of August 2020, and it's received rave reviews. So David, we are very anxious to hear about the book and what you'll be reading tonight.
Well, I'm so honored to be here with people whom I've read for a long time and look up to so much. This is, Winter Counts is my debut novel. It's coming out from Echo HarperCollins. And yeah, I'm so honored it was chosen by Oprah as one of her picks for the month, which was nice. And Apple Books and some other stuff that I can't talk about yet. So I'm real grateful with the reception that it's gotten. And yeah, it's a strange time to be a debut author in the middle of a pandemic, but I'll tell you a little bit about the book. So the book is a literary thriller, and the underlying premise of the book is something called the Major Crimes Act. The Major Crimes Act is a law passed by the US Congress in 1885. This law, which is still in effect, says that Native nations may not prosecute felony crimes that occur on their own lands. Instead, the Native nation, the tribal police, must contact the FBI and federal prosecutors and hand the case over them. So even maybe you've got somebody who raped a woman or hurt a little girl, and so the person is in custody, they have to refer the case out to the federal authorities. However, what is happening is that the federal prosecutors are declining to prosecute these cases about 1/3 to half of the time. So about 1/3 of all violent felony crimes, the feds say we're not going to prosecute for a variety of reasons, and the offender is let free. He's released. He's let go, and he or she is free to offend again. And this obviously is an outrageous situation. And so what is happening is there has sprung up a class of professional vigilantes. So if somebody's hurt your little girl or your little boy and the feds have let them go, you hire somebody like the hero in Winter Counts who beats people up for money. These are real people that exist on reservations. My guy, which is based on a real class of people, he charges $100 for each bone he breaks and $100 for each tooth he knocks out. So if, again, if somebody hurt your little girl and the offender is walking free, maybe you're going to seek justice another way. So that's what the book is about. Now, if you're interested in the Major Crimes Act, I did publish an op-ed, an essay in the New York Times, July 19th. So New York Times has an essay that I wrote on the Major Crimes Act. It's not fiction. And I talk a little bit in that essay. It's very short, 850 words, about the Major Crimes Act and its effect upon Indian country. And so I wrote this book really to be a page turner. I did study writing. I have an MFA degree from the Institute of American Indian Arts. So I wanted this to be hopefully a compelling page turner. But at the same time, I wanted hopefully to spark a dialogue among people to educate them about the Major Crimes Act and the broken criminal justice system on reservations. I touch on a number of issues as well in the book. Healthcare system on Native reservations is terrible. Our food supply is terrible. Food sovereignty is a real problem on Native reservations. On my own reservation, the Rosebud Indian Reservation, the average life expectancy for a man is 47 years old, 47. That is because of the terrible healthcare system we have, the terrible food that we get. It's a terrible system. And so I'm hoping that I can spark a dialogue, but at the same time, I'm here to entertain. At the same time, the book is also a very much a character-driven study of Virgil Wounded Horse, who is, in my Lakota language, he's an Heska, which is a half-breed. Heska is a word in the Lakota language, which means translator or speaks white. It has over time become a slur. It has become an insult. So to be called an Heska is to be called in a nasty way, sort of a half-breed. So in the book, Virgil grapples with his identity. So his character arc is grappling with his status as an Heska. And I won't reveal too much, but hopefully the book works on a number of levels. It's a crime thriller, it's a character study, but there are also some political and cultural issues as well. So I think that's probably enough about the book.
Will you do a little bit of a reading from the book for us?
I would be absolutely thrilled. So I'll just read a few pages from chapter 1. This is, by the way, on Apple Books right now. It was also chosen the best book of August by Apple Books. So if you have, I didn't even know about this, but if you have Apple Books on your iPhone, the book is there right now, and there's a 50-page sample. You just have to go to Best Books of August, and it gives you a quite large sample. But thank you very much, Apple Books. I'm delighted and thrilled. And so there are 5 chapters up there right now, something like that. So I'm just going to read a few pages from chapter 1. So this is Winter Counts. I leaned back in the seat of my old Ford Pinto, listening to the sounds coming from the depot, the reservation's only tavern. There was a stream of Indians and white ranchers going inside. I knew Gov Yellowhawk was there with his buddies, pounding beer and drinking shots. Gov taught gym at the local school, football, basketball, soccer. But, word was, he sometimes got a little too involved with his students, both boys and girls. I was going to let him get good and drunk, Then the real party would start. I had brass knuckles and a baseball bat stowed in my trunk, but those wouldn't be necessary. Gov was a fat ass piece of shit with a fry bread gut as big as a buffalo's ass. I'd been hired to beat the hell out of Gov by the father of a little girl at the school. Gov had sneaked up on the girl in the bathroom, held her down, and raped her. The girl's parents had confronted the school's principal, but Gov came from one of the most powerful families on the res, and the school refused to take any action. The principal had even threatened a lawsuit against the parents for making a false accusation. The tribal police couldn't do anything. The feds prosecuted all felony crimes on the res, and they didn't mess with any crime short of murder. Now the little girl was too scared to go back to her class, and he was free to molest other kids. I'd waived my fee for this job. Usually I charged $100 for each tooth I knocked out and each bone I broke, but I decided to kick Gov's ass for free. I'd hated him for years. Even as a teenager, he was a mean asshole who terrorized other kids, especially Ayeskas like me. Of course, Gov had always been accompanied by his gang. I couldn't remember him ever fighting solo, but tonight was his time. The stones, gimme shelter, drifted through the door of the bar to the parking lot, leaving little melodic ripples like ghosts in my head. I lit a cigarette and waited for Gov. He'd come out sooner or later. An hour later, I spotted him walking out of the bar. He was singing an off-key tune and stumbling. I slipped out of the Pinto and crouched behind his shiny new pickup. He'd parked at the far end of the lot so no one would ding his expensive ride. That suited me just fine. I could enact some Indian justice away from any of Gov's drinking buddies. I moved out from the shadows. He wore faded jeans and a t-shirt with a Fighting Sioux mascot. His eyes were foggy and he stank of beer. I could see the birthmark on his forehead that looked like a little tomahawk. Hey, Gov. The fuck? He squinted out into the darkness, unable to pinpoint who was speaking to him. It's Virgil. Oh, Virgil Wounded Horse. Oh, are you drinking or what? The bar just closed. Yeah, I know. I was waiting for you. What for? Grace Little Thunder. His face darkened. Ain't seen her. That's not what I hear. I take care of the Wakinaja, show them how to be Lakota. Sometimes the parents don't appreciate it. The way of the world, huh? I move between Gov and the truck. I teach the kids, help their families. Sometimes they want more than I can give. St. Gov, just a guy who likes to cornhole the boys and finger the girls. You know how kids are. They want attention. They make shit up. People make a fuss over them. The other kids making shit up too? I heard about you and little Mikey Dupree. Gov tried to move past me. I don't need this bullshit. I ain't seen you out there helping the Oate. From what I hear, you don't do nothing. You got shit to say? Take it up with Principal Smith. I'm getting out of here. I don't think so. Look, asshole, Grace Little Thunder's family is nothing but trash. Her mom's a drunk and her dad ain't worked in 10 years. That girl is only 9 years old. Eat shit. What business is it of yours? I landed a hard body shot to Gov's midsection. The punch would have knocked most men over, but his massive stomach absorbed most of the blow. Heska motherfucker, Gov snarled and he lunged at me. I saw the move coming, sidestepped it, and smashed him in the jaw. Gov shook his head like a wet dog. How the fuck was he still standing up? I thought about grabbing the baseball bat. Then I felt a blinding pain in my side. A blow to the kidney, then another, this one worse than the first. Waves of electricity, neural impulses. Gotta stay up, don't go down or it's finished. Reeling, dizzy, I tried to puzzle out a strategy, but my mind was like an iceberg, slowly bobbing in the waters. You half-breed bastard, he roared. I felt Gov spittle on my face, and then I was on the ground. Shit. He kicked me in the back over and over, each blow a jackhammer. I tried to maneuver through the cloud in my brain. Gov panted, out of breath, running out of gas. Grab his feet, I thought. I snaked out my arm and yanked his legs. He went down with a thud, and I saw my opening. I stood up, grabbed his right arm, and twisted it behind his back until I met some resistance. Then I twisted some more. How you like that, you son of a bitch, I said. Gov looked up at me and hissed, fuck you, Haffy. I had to hand it to him. He had some balls. I flashed back to high school when I'd been much smaller, not the big guy I was now. I remembered all the times I'd been held down and beaten by Gov and the other full-bloods, my angry tears, the humiliation still with me. I wondered if I should let Gov go, show him the mercy that I'd never been given. That was the Lakota way, wasn't it? Wakan Tognaka, that was one of the 7 Lakota values. It meant compassion, generosity, kindness, forgiveness. I remembered the lessons my teachers taught me back at school. They taught that the greatest honor, the greatest bravery came when a warrior chose to let his enemy go free and touched him with the coup stick. Legend was that even Crazy Horse had shown his courage by counting coup on a Pawnee warrior once, chasing him across the river, but deciding not to kill him, to honor his bravery and grant him his freedom. I knew that the honorable thing to do, the Lakota way, was to set Gov free without any more punishment. Fuck that. I twisted his arm until it came loose from the socket with a sickening crunch. Then I stepped back and kicked him in the cheek with all my force, snapping his head back violently. I took my boot heel and smashed it down on his face, teeth snapping like stale potato chips. I kneeled down and grabbed Gov's hair. You listen to me, you goddamn scumbag. You ever touch another kid at that school, I'll cut your dick off and shove it down your throat. Hear me, Skin? He didn't say anything. His left eye was swollen and bloody, and his nose, seemingly gone, pounded back into his face. Blood streamed from the black hole of his former nose and mouth. How's that for counting coup, asshole? I said. I leaned over to see if he was still breathing. A few faint breaths. I saw some teeth lying on the concrete. They looked like little yellow tombstones. I scooped them up and stuck them in my pocket. Thank you.
That is a hell of an enforcer you got there. That was, David, I hope that one of the things
amazing.
I just have to say that I hope one of the things that you can't talk about is that this is being made into a movie or a TV series, because it sounds great. I know you can't say anything.
I do have an offer from a producer. My film agent, we're negotiating back and forth. That's not the thing I can't talk about. I've been sworn to secrecy from my publisher about a couple of things. So
okay.
I just have to leave it there.
David, we had a comment on Facebook, and Larry Sheps, who's a friend of the Rogue Women Writers and a real thriller reader. He loves thrillers. Said that he thought it sounded so great. He immediately ordered your debut, and he compared you to Todd Goldberg. So that's a real compliment.
Oh, Todd Goldberg, the writer?
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of his work. I've read some of his work. So Todd, if you're out there, thank you. I'm honored. So.
No, that was Larry Sheps. He compared you to Todd Goldberg. Yeah. He said that he reminded him of Todd. So
well, whoever it was, thank you so much. The sound is so bad on my computer I can barely hear you. But thank you guys so much, honestly.
Well,
You're breaking up, Chris.
Yeah, you're breaking up,
and it's
we're not
freezing.
Yeah.
I don't think we're.
Chris, try killing the video. You might just have audio.
Can you hear us?
Oh, I think she's frozen.
She's frozen.
Okay.
Yeah, she got the froze.
Mine went totally unstable.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're still there.
I have a feeling I'm going to be ordering books on Amazon the minute we hang up tonight.
Same thing. You're absolutely right. So maybe we can come back at the end then for questions. I don't know if Chris will be back with us or not. So we will just, okay, well, oh, she's gone now.
Yep.
I have a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
I spent some time in South Dakota this year, and another one of our friends, Sandra Brennan, lives there, and she has quite an association with the Lakota there. How I've always been a little bit confused because they're Lakota Sioux. There are all kinds of different, but you're saying Lakota and you're in Colorado. How do they all relate? Can they be the same in different areas or?
So, sure, I'm happy to explain. So Sioux is the English word for our people. It's actually a French word that means little snakes. So we tend to disfavor the word Sioux. Now, having said that, the official name of my nation, we tend to use nation over tribe whenever we can, but the name of my nation is the Rosebud Sioux tribe, to make it even more confusing. But we refer to ourselves by our Lakota names, which is the Sichangu Lakota Nation. There are 7 Lakota nations, but there are also several Dakota nations. Right. And then there are a couple of Nakota. So you have Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. We're all like cousins. So.
Okay, great. I have a question too, but we're running a little bit short of time. So we want to definitely get to our next author. And this is Lisa Black, who is one of our own Rogue Women writers. By day, this New York Times bestselling author is a forensic specialist with the Cape Coral, Florida Police Department. And I don't know if you all saw her nodding her head as Heather was talking about no forensic evidence if you're in, right? Yeah, so she knew what Heather was talking about from experience. She's a member of the American Academy of Forensic Science, and she is a certified crime scene analyst. Lisa has testified as an expert witness in over 65 court cases. The books have been called Brilliant and Twisty. She loves to travel and explore new places, and her favorite drink, this is a great one, is a hot chocolate martini. Do you have one of those tonight?
I don't know about you lightweights, but yeah. Don't forget not imbibing.
Her favorite snack, and this is really hard to say, is Betty Crocker's boozy bourbon chocolate cupcakes.
Yes.
So now, like, this drink and snack combo sound pretty lethal to me. Yeah. Pretty delicious. And speaking of lethal, Lisa's latest novel, Every Kind of Wicked, publishes this month and is the latest in her Gardner Renner series. And naturally, a book by a forensic scientist is going to have a murder in it. And in Every Kind of Wicked, the discovery of a young man sprawled on top of a snowy grave, his heart shattered by a single wound, leads forensic expert Maggie Gardner and Cleveland detective Jack Renner into a dangerous web of lies. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
We would love to hear a reading from Every Kind of Wicked and a little bit about the book and you.
Okay, well, this is my book. It's the 6th, I think, I lose track, in the Gardner Renner series.
It is.
And it's funny, we've kind of 2 people writing vigilante stories here tonight, because my character Maggie is a forensic specialist, and Jack Renner is a homicide detective who also has a sideline of taking the worst of the city's criminals, the ones that never get convicted because they never leave enough evidence to get into a courtroom. And, you know, he doesn't hate, he's sort of like the opposite of your character, David. He doesn't hate them. He knows they're just a product of their environment. And so he sits them down and plies them with their favorite food and drink and listens to them. And then when they're about as relaxed and happy as it is possible for them to get in this world, he puts 3 bullets in the back of their head, because he feels that this is the humane and responsible thing to do. So, but when he ran into Maggie Gardner, who picks up his trail in the first book, That Darkness, then he has a little bit of a dilemma about whether to continue this sideline or not. But in Every Kind of Wicked, they're tracking down not only who killed the people who are involved in this book, but they come upon an illegal call center. So it has a lot about scammers and scamming and the scam phone calls that we all get, which are like the scourge of everyone's life. And I could not decide where to read from in this book, so I decided to just start at the beginning.
Chat, yes.
So
I'll probably be about another 10 minutes.
Okay. So I'm just going to start at chapter 1, page 1. Friday, 8 a.m. Well, that's less than helpful, Maggie said of the snow. The white flakes drifted lazily downward, landing on the frozen grass, the bare limbs of the large trees, the bloodstains sprinkled across the worn stones, and the very stiff body of a young man who had not dressed well for the weather. Yet exposure hadn't killed him. He had been dead long before his body froze. From the deep red stain blossoming from the center of his chest, Maggie Gardner assumed a gunshot, or shots, had been the likely cause of death. Something had penetrated his internal systems to leak his lifeblood out across his white shirt and over the stones beneath him, which marked, coincidentally, a grave. But Maggie didn't say so. Declaring cause of death was a pathologist's job, and she worked as a forensic specialist. Her job would be to find the evidence around said death in order to help her colleagues at the police department determine who had walked away from this boy's last encounter, which would be more difficult to do with each passing moment as the snow slowly covered up the body, the blood, and all her evidence. She had arrived on the scene immediately before the assigned detectives and now felt them standing on either side of her, Jack Renner to her right and Thomas Riley to her left. Renner, tall, only a bit dark and not so handsome, and his partner, distinctly shorter but lighter in both coloring and personality, and her, an inch shorter than Riley and nearly half his body weight, no gun, no badge, a civilian employee in a department of sworn officers. They made a somber and all too familiar tableau. A dead guy in a cemetery, Riley said. That's, what's the word? Weird, Maggie suggested. I was going to say redundant. He took a closer look at the body, and so did she. Their young victim lay facing the sky, eyes unable to shut against the precipitation. He wore jeans, a t-shirt, and a satin jacket that would have been at home inside a disco circa 1985, unlikely to be much protection against Cleveland weather in mid-December. Maggie put his age at about 25. He had brown hair, brown eyes, and a deeper hue to his skin, even with the pallor of death over it. Any ID? Riley asked. Wallet? Phone? She patted his pockets, empty, and they couldn't turn him over to examine any rear pockets until the medical examiner's investigator arrived. But under the open jacket, he wore a white badge pinned to his shirt. It had rounded edges and red letters, which said only, Evan. A streak of brown stains crossed over the V and continued along the shirt. Riley said, so somebody shot him. I'm not so sure. See those drops? Round spots implied blood fell on him when he was already laid out. I don't know why a gun would be that bloody when it wasn't close enough to leave a jagged hole or the powdery soot of fouling. Jack followed her reasoning. So you think it's a stab wound? That's my guess, but I can't be positive either way. Autopsy will tell. But a stab wound would make more sense if the killer stood here for a second while blood dripped off the weapon and caused those spots. They didn't come from the victim's hands, they're clean. So the killer waited, Jack said, making sure he was dead. He ought to know, Maggie thought.
That's fascinating. I think we've lost Chris, and so we don't have questions from people in our on the chat. But I do have a question for you, Lisa, and I have a couple questions for you actually, and everyone else can chime in. But first of all, obviously, you do a lot. You do this in your work. Do you take cases? I mean, have you written about actual cases and, put them into your books, or is that just not something that's done if you're, with things that you're really working on that are true or have worked on?
Not usually. Basically, in real life, crimes are just not that interesting. They're not complicated enough to last an entire book, basically. But there have been two books that I used real life cases in, and I should also say all the little details of working in forensics and working at a coroner's office and working in a police department, that's all from real life. And lots of times when she's mentioning I had a case where, that's actually from real life. But the actual plots, no, not usually, except in Evidence of Murder. We had a case in Cleveland where this woman worked as an escort, which sounds a little sleazy to most people. But she also, had a decent house on a decent street and a 8-year-old daughter and a steady live-in boyfriend. So she was not the kind of person who would just disappear. And yet that's exactly, what she did. She wasn't transient or anything, but she just disappeared off the face of the earth. And we always thought her last client killed her, who was no one she knew. He just called up the agency for a girl and she was up. But we could never prove it. And we never found her body. And I think it's been over 20 years now, and still we never found her body. So I kind of started with this idea of a missing, escort with a child. And then I was at the medical examiner's office here, and, word had gotten around that I write books, and the diener who was assisting with the autopsy said, "Oh, I know the perfect way to kill somebody because it wouldn't leave any trace at all." It was a case he had worked in Miami, and he was writing a paper on it for death investigators. So of course I said, "Tell me more." And that became evidence of murder. And then Trail of Blood deals with the whole backdrop and setup of the book is the torso killer in 1930s during the Depression in Cleveland, Ohio, who was basically America's version of Jack the Ripper. He killed at least 20 people, at least 12 people, probably twice that, dismembered, killed both men and women, like wrapped up certain body parts and left them where they could be found. I mean, really bizarre. And yet everyone's heard of Jack the Ripper and nobody's heard of the torso killer. So I don't understand that. But I used that in that book.
Was he caught?
No.
Oh, wow.
No, and they think he killed people in other states too. It's interesting. Yeah, it's fun to look up the torso.
Yeah. Torsos tonight. Yes.
But that's not H.H. Holmes.
No,
Oh,
H.H.
okay.
was in Chicago.
Okay, right.
And that was earlier. That was 1888 or something. It was a-
And I guess he had a whole sort of murder house.
Yeah.
Well, now, do you guys have anything to ask each other before we close up here? No.
I have a question for David. David, have you ever read any of the Parker books by Westlake?
I've read some Westlake. I've read one or two of them. It was years ago. Yeah, I mean, I love that stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're obviously your characters are completely different, but something about the pacing and the way that opening rolls out. It reminded me a lot of that kind of the way that Westlake would do the Parker books. I mean, very well, I thought, very gripping, very pulls you right in.
Thank you. I'm honored, really, to be even mentioned in the same sentences that often.
I have my son here too, and he's nodding his head about this.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah,
awesome. Say, well, we have unfortunately run out of time. This has been terrific. I want to thank all of you, Heather, David, Gary, Lisa. I know, I think that probably everyone has added 4 books to their to be read. I know I have.
And I know I'm hanging up and hitting Amazon. I do know that.
And thank you, all of you readers who were here with us tonight. Don't forget to order the books.
There you go.
That when we get off. And please join us for our next Rogue Reads, which will be on September the 14th. Mm-hmm. And we look forward to seeing you. Good night, everyone. And thanks
for having us, y'all.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Everybody has to end.
I'm trying to figure out how.
They could just click end in the front.
No, I was just thinking, I can't wait to see you again. I mean, like really see you. It's been like, I'm so used to us getting to Key West or to, Mystery, our Florida group or, somewhere.
It's getting so tiring to have everything canceled, just.
Well, hopefully maybe we'll get some more next year. I don't know. Let's hope.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, well, take care.
It was super to see you. And you too. Yeah, take care of yourself. Okay.
You too. Bye.